Poor bugger. Um,
Anyway, all right.
anyway, yeah,
Am I set up? I assume this is a video. Am
I
I
think
set
so.
up for
Yeah,
the
I started
background?
record. Yeah, I think it's all good. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, yeah, bloody hell, life's crazy, isn't it? I can't even really believe that I'm even talking to you. This is the world. You're a hero of mine.
Oh, well, that's great. Thank you. That's really
Yeah.
nice of you to
Well, I've
say.
just been on
Just
this.
because I've written a lot about glyphosate.
Well, yeah. Well, I think it's just so crucial that people understand this side of it. Um, and for me, and this side of it, so people know what we're talking about, is Carey has written a book called Whitewash, The Story of a Weed Killer, Cancer, and the Corruption of Science, which was released in 2017. And it is all about Bayer Monsanto and sort of breaking it all down a little bit about how the world works, which is so confronting. And partway into my journey, because I believe glyphosate caused my cancer and I was diagnosed 2 years ago. And then I started researching, but I think it came about, or the way that I wound up at glyphosate was through science and was understanding about the shikimate pathway and um, the amino acid tryptophan, essential amino acids. And so I got there. And then partway through my chemotherapy, I learned a bit about the corruption of the medical world. And then I started investigating the corruption of the agricultural world and of course, Bayer Monsanto. So I kind of only really, I was so innocent before cancer and I only wound up where I am talking to someone like you because I went through a certain level of suffering to get there. And I was just
Right.
skipping through life, having a ball before that. Yeah. But how did you wind up? Like, how did you get there? Can you explain to people like how it all started for you and why you've dived so deep down this path?
Yeah, definitely. And, offer condolences, if that's the right word, like on your cancer and what you've gone through. I've in this work, I've spent so much time talking to people who have either suffered through that cancer journey and
Mm,
have survived, or the loved ones of people who they've lost to cancer, and it's just
mm,
brutal, like for all people involved. So I'm sorry that you've gone through that.
thank you.
I was assigned to in 1998, Reuters, the international news agency that I worked for, assigned me to move to Kansas City, and start to get to know this company named Monsanto, that was just down the highway in St. Louis, Missouri, and start covering how they were revolutionizing agriculture with the introduction of genetically modified seeds, that were
Mm,
primarily designed to encourage the use of this herbicide that Monsanto developed and introduced, glyphosate-based Roundup, and they had other brand names, Ranger Pro, and a whole array of products based on this chemistry, this chemical called glyphosate. So, Monsanto was really changing agriculture because of this new technology, and encouraging farmers to spray glyphosate, directly over crops that were growing in the fields. And this was really, new and different, and increased glyphosate sales, increased glyphosate impact, on all of us, on the environment and on human health. It's leaving residues in foods, it's getting in the waterways, it's getting in the soil. The
And this
use
was
of
meant to
glyphosate.
be a feel-good story. You were meant to be doing a feel-good story. Like this is a positive thing.
Well, for many farmers, they considered it a positive thing. It certainly was a
Yeah.
positive thing for Monsanto. They were generating, hundreds of millions of dollars. But that's how I started. It's just as a reporter, asking the questions, and getting to know the people involved, the company. I spent a lot of time inside the company with their executives and their scientists. I got to know farmers and outside scientists, academics. Spent time with the regulatory agencies, and over time, as I became more familiar with this and following the science, and concerns were mounting, first really about environmental health and then about human health, and just following the science and reading it, and then writing more and more about it. And Monsanto really didn't like that. They came
Mm.
after me pretty hard, tried to shut me down, get me fired, get me to write about other things.
And
You
they
know,
didn't manage to do that. How did you stay in there?
well, yeah, so then I wrote a book, right? So,
Hey.
um, and that book, Whitewash, really documented the company's deception over many decades that I was able to uncover through correspondence with the EPA and internal memos and just a whole array of evidence that was out there that showed that the company knew that glyphosate, could cause cancer, could be dangerous, that a whole array of things that they tried to hide, the way they tried to manipulate science, manipulate regulators. So I wrote my first book, wrote another book, and have just continued to cover this and the larger issues about pesticides and how they impact human health and environmental health, and how our regulators too often are not staying abreast of the science and are just relying on these companies to tell them what the science says and what they should do and how they should regulate. And, it's taken a toll. There are well over 100,000 people in the US sued Monsanto slash Bayer, which bought Monsanto in 2018, alleging their cancers were caused by their use of these glyphosate products. And, they've been awarded or won or received billions of dollars in settlement and jury verdict awards.
Yeah,
The litigation.
I read an article the other day, $18 billion they've now paid out. And there's
Yeah.
still, and they've paid out 140,000 people to keep them out of court. They've lost 11 out of 17 in court, and there's still 70,000 people suing them. So, but I imagine, they've got an accounting team and they're looking at it thinking, oh, okay, when we get to 25 billion, then the books start to not look so good, and then we'll consider something. But I wonder if they've got a backup plan.
Well, they have. I mean, Bayer has been making it pretty clear how painful this is. I mean, the shareholders in Bayer were very angry almost immediately after
Oh, are you there, Kerry?
so I keep going. Yeah.
Sorry, I
Um,
lost you there for a minute. You were saying that
oh,
the shareholders were a bit upset.
shareholders, right, have been pressuring the company ever since they purchased Monsanto in 2018 to make this go away. So, they have stopped selling glyphosate to homeowners, residential users in the United States. They've come up with different combinations of chemicals instead of glyphosate. They're still selling it to farmers, of course, their biggest market, but not in the residential use anymore. And they've said we want this to go away. If it doesn't go away, we may stop selling it to farmers. We may have to get completely out of glyphosate. They can't afford to have these losses continue indefinitely.
Wow. So at what point though did you realize, like when you were amongst the company doing your stories, at what point did you realize that this was pretty serious and this was pretty corrupt?
Oh my gosh, there were so many probably little points along the road, right? And I
Mm.
don't think just kind of one moment, but sort of a building up of many, many moments. The frog in the boiling pot of water or something, right? You don't realize it until you're
Mhm.
sort of, um, it was almost like they protest too much, right? Very early on, I'm writing these stories. I'm quoting them, I'm quoting other people, I'm just laying out the facts, trying to do the best job I can to tell the truth. I didn't
Yeah.
have a position or an advocacy in mind. I didn't, I was just writing about true things that research was showing us. Um, and they just were, it was so over the top, the responses. And, when I first found out about one of the most astounding things, I think, very early on was when I first found out about the 1985 study, 1985, that they
Gee.
had submitted to the EPA.
Okay.
And this was never published. It was, proprietary to Monsanto. But the EPA scientists looked at it and they said, oh, this looks like this could cause cancer because these mice are getting these rare tumors when they're dosed with glyphosate. This was the company's own study. And So we think we should classify it, as possibly cancer causing, possibly oncogenic. And Monsanto said absolutely not. And I was able to get all of these communications back and forth between the EPA and between Monsanto. And I had to, sign all sorts of disclosures with EPA that I wouldn't give away Monsanto's secrets, ridiculous sort of. But you could see the back and forth, and the scientist said, no, this looks like it causes cancer. And Monsanto says, absolutely not. We will tell you what you should say. And they brought in another scientist to basically work with the EPA scientist and do his own analysis and tell them they shouldn't find this concerning. And this became a really big thing over a few years with the EPA. And the EPA said, do the study again, Monsanto. Monsanto said, absolutely not. We're not going to do it again. And ultimately, the EPA sided with Monsanto over its own scientific team. And the EPA scientists refused to sign off on it, but they
How does
ultimately
how does
declared
that
that
happen?
Monsanto, they would believe Monsanto and not their own scientists. And I think that was kind of the very first, oh my gosh, kind of thing. But,
Mm.
there was also the 2000 study that Monsanto ghost wrote, and documents that I found where they celebrate all the hard work that their scientists have put into this independent study that looks like it's authored and looks like it was done by people not connected to Monsanto, um, and they're gleeful about this massive research paper that shows that there's no harm, that glyphosate doesn't cause cancer, doesn't cause reproductive harm, is the greatest thing ever. And they're going to give it to regulators around the world because it's going to be an independent study showing the safety of glyphosate. And they celebrate and they get polo shirts and they have a party, um, and they talk about all the hard work that they spent on this independent study.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff, just your jaw kind of drops.
It's yeah, it's so crazy and so confronting for a cancer patient because everybody says they, and then I think, who are they? Like, don't they have children? And, like their scientists come up with some pretty average information for the product. And then they go to a marketing team and say, hey, how can we spin this so that we can have a party and wear these polo shirts and make this narrative look really good? But they've got the money to do it. And but then what about like, because yourself, why aren't there more of you who have then said, oh, actually, this is really terrible. What are we doing to humanity here? Like, why aren't there more whistleblowers? And who's at the top? Who are they?
Well, I would say from a journalist perspective, it's really hard, and they make it really hard. It was really hard at Reuters to be harassed and know that every single time you wrote a story that would reference a scientific study that, spoke to alleged harm, or, something negative about this company's product, that they were going to just pull out the stops and wear out your editors and wear you out, and just, they would call me at home. They would call my editor at home. They would want to come and meet with us in person. And, thankfully, my primary editor, my first editor, was like, if there's nothing wrong, if there's nothing factually wrong with the story, then like leave us alone. Um, but then you get editors subsequently who maybe aren't as familiar with it, and they get worried and they don't want to be bothered and they don't want the phone calls, and so they say, maybe you shouldn't write about that. Let's just skip that story this week. Let's just not go there because we know we're going to get hassled. And that happens in newsrooms all over the place. There are countless stories about reporters who have had their stories shut down because of pressure from big companies, in this industry and many other industries. And they had front groups that they funded online, front groups that look like they're health and public health groups that are nonprofit, that are, and they're funded by Monsanto or others in the industry, and they write horrible things. There were horrible things about me, and other journalists. Pulitzer Prize winning journalists at the New York Times were targeted as well if they dared to write a story about a negative aspect of glyphosate or Roundup, and they they scientists too, scientists, journalists, um, get attacked, get slandered, get harassed. I
Yeah.
was threatened. We were doxxed online, and they would put things online about where you live and who are your children and where your children are and live and go and what their hobbies are. It's so maybe it's easier to just not write about it. Is one answer to why aren't more people doing it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it makes it so tough. Yeah, and it's one benefit for me. I'm self-employed and I don't have anybody to answer to. I'm
Yeah.
talking about glyphosate so much, it's probably a bit damaging for our wine brand, but
Oh.
I just but I just feel like you that there is a much bigger issue going on and people need to know. But do you
Yeah.
feel like
I
it's,
mean,
sorry, you go.
go ahead. Sorry.
Do you feel like it's
I
building
mean,
now
I'm
though?
just,
Do you feel like there's some momentum?
I mean, certainly. First book attention. The second book, there was a documentary film that was made tracking based on my books and that tracked the first trial. There's a feature film in the works now, that Netflix has purchased. All of these, international media has focused on the trials in the U.S. and reported on those. Certainly with respect to glyphosate and Monsanto, I think, and Roundup, that has become a pretty well-known kind of story. Unfortunately, as I've said many times before, if you get rid of all the glyphosate in the world, you haven't solved the bigger problem, that we are encouraging, allowing the use of a whole array of toxic chemicals, pesticides in particular, and other toxins, and we're allowing the use of them in ways that threaten public health on a daily basis. Right? Agriculture is my specialty, the pesticides that are used in farming and growing our food, but there's a whole array of others, and the science and the policy matters are all set up to tell us don't look too hard at that, trust these big companies that are selling these chemicals. And it's quite often, like in the case of Monsanto, decades later, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years later, that we get the evidence that shows us, oh, that stuff really is bad for us and is killing us and is causing disease. And gosh, they knew it way back when, um, but they just kept
Yeah.
selling it to us. So Monsanto, I often say, is sort of, I think, the poster child for this much bigger problem that we have of industries pushing products, particularly chemicals, on us that are really not good for our health, cancer causing, infecting fertility, reproductive harm, neurodevelopmental harm.
Autism.
These things are real, and we're exposed to them in the air, the water, the food we eat. And if you're a farmer or living near a farm, it's being sprayed. You should at least know of the risks so that you can make choices or take efforts to protect yourself at the very least, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And be strategic with the way that you're using all these chemicals if you have to, because that's a big thing. I think a lot of people are scared about the transition away from them, or farmers are nervous. Because I put a video up the other week saying that I believe glyphosate caused my cancer, and I got hundreds of messages, and one was from a farmer's wife who her husband and her son both have cancer, and she believes it's because of the herbicides, pesticides that they're spraying on their property, but she's not allowed to talk about it. So they don't want to hear it. And I can understand because they're going through cancer treatment and they're going through the psychological trauma of cancer as well, which is one of the hardest parts. And if they were to acknowledge that or just believe that these things cause their cancer, their lives would have to change so much. That's their income. So because of the stigma around this, they would rather carry on and potentially die from
Right.
this
Yeah.
than address the issue. Because it's such a massive paradigm shift, is it what is needed?
It really is. And farmers, I hear the same thing from farmers here in the US, right, who are struggling with cancer. Some, a few, not a lot, but struggling and still spraying,
Yeah,
getting their cancer treatment and still spraying. But, there are experts in this arena, the United Nations, other organizations have tried to make it clear and tried to that you don't have to use these pesticides. Certainly, you don't have to use this level um, of pesticides, particularly that we're using in the U.S. now, to grow ample supplies of food. Um, it's the
yeah,
paradigm we've set up. It's the system that Monsanto and these other companies have kind of locked farmers into. And our policies, I don't know about where you are, but here in the US, the subsidies and insurance programs and all these other things are all built to support that current paradigm, making it even more difficult for farmers to break out of it. But there are farmers doing it and growing food in a way that's healthier for them and healthier for the environment because they recognize I'm on a pesticide dependent treadmill here and
yeah.
I got to get off of it at some point or my kids are going to be on it and their kids and their kids
Mm.
or we're not going to have a farm and everybody's going to be
It's so
suffering from
sad,
disease.
isn't it? And then the social aspect of that, because if you decide to change, then you're probably going to lose friends. Farmers, they're very social and they can be a little bit cliquey and and people don't really understand weeds and they don't understand the soil health and they're just doing what these chemical companies come in and advise them to do.
Right.
And these
Yeah.
agricultural practices, they're so much like mental health. You can't see it. So it's very hard to acknowledge it. People see a booming crop on the top and they think it's okay when the soil is very sick, and it
Right.
can be.
Well, and farmers have so many other things too, right? So many pressure points on their business that they have to manage and they have to worry about. I mean, I've always I said I dedicated that first book to farmers. I just spending as much time as I have. I've literally been in hundreds and hundreds of farm fields in
Amazing.
almost every state, probably in the United States. Different, ranches and vineyards and fruit and veggies and row crops and
Yeah.
but I've just always so amazed that you would even want to be a farmer because you can spend all your money and do everything exactly right. And then a force beyond your control, a market force or Mother Nature can come in and just wipe you out, right? Like
Yeah.
it,
Yeah,
it
we
can
need
be
to look
interesting.
after our farmers. They are the most important people in our lives and they're taking all the risk.
Yeah,
So it's so, so bloody hard for those guys. That's
it really
incredible.
is. It's really a noble, I think, a very brave, profession. What I always ask them why they do it, it's, the love of the land and being their own boss and being outside and kind of family in that tradition and then knowing they're also, kind of feeding, right? Their communities are feeding the world. So yeah, I have a lot of respect for farmers, certainly.
So what about when the genetically modified seeds came out? Because now Bayer own 96% of the seeds in America and 80% of seeds worldwide, which
Right.
is just such an insane figure. But were you around then? Were you investigating then? Or can you expand on that side of the business for us a little bit?
Well, certainly, yeah. Monsanto became the world's largest seed company, buying up, and not just, row crop seeds, but they bought up germplasm and they bought up, the vegetables and the whole thing. So Bayer inherited that from them, certainly. The GMO crops, I was so intrigued by that. And, as I said, Monsanto invited me into their headquarters and their labs and really spent a lot of time, trying to teach me about, the magic and benefits of GMO crops. I feel like I spent a lot of time like waiting for the wonderful magical things that they said they were going to develop,
Really?
these things that would taste better or be more nutritious or, I don't know, resist diseases and resist drought and do all of these sorts of things. And from the day that they were introduced in the mid 1990s to today, as we sit here, The main type of trait, the main genetic trait in all genetically modified crops around the world that are grown and harvested is herbicide resistance, herbicide tolerance, meaning you can spray a pesticide over it and it won't die. Like that's the point of it. It's not that it's better for the consumer. It's not, cheaper to grow. It doesn't grow better with less water. It's so that you can spray an herbicide directly over it. That is the primary trait planted and harvested around the world. And the industry tracks that data, so we have that data. They don't like to talk about that, right? They like to talk about the very small percentage of crops that bring other sorts of benefits. Insect resistance is one that is proven pretty good for farmers, but of course, like the weed, like the herbicide tolerant, what happens is Mother Nature rebels, and so spraying glyphosate over weeds over and over and over and over directly over crops and over growing weeds over and over and over again, we developed weed resistance. Millions of acres of weed resistance here in the US, weeds that farmers then couldn't spray with glyphosate anymore and kill. So they would then spray either more glyphosate or glyphosate and dicamba. We now have farmers spraying glyphosate, dicamba, 2,4-D over
Gee.
these crops. So it's just more and more and more. And if you track government data and academic data on it, you can see how this has just risen the amount of chemical herbicide that we are putting on our crops now.
Mm.
Same thing with insect resistance. It was great for farmers trying to deal with above and below ground pests until the pests start to develop resistance, right? So, and then there are concerns, of course, about the toxins actually in the plant because they developed a lot of this toxin in the plant itself, Bt corn in particular. Um, but when you talk about really consumer beneficial traits, like things that maybe they last longer, they have longer shelf life. I don't know that that's actually a good consumer trait. I mean, if my apple should be brown, I kind of want to know that. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't want it artificially to not look as old as it is. But they have brought some consumer friendly, and there has been some disease resistant kind of. They tried some drought tolerant. They didn't really get very far with genetically modified drought tolerance. So, I'm not against, or I don't want to say genetic modification is necessarily a terrible, awful, bad thing in crops, but I think we should talk about what it really is most prevalently, and that is designed solely to allow you to spray herbicides right over your crops.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and
Yeah,
that
it would be a
mostly makes it easier for farmers, but it also benefits the bottom line of the companies selling the pesticides, selling the
yeah.
herbicides.
Yeah, it would all be okay if we had the science to back it up and they were very public and honest about the science, but it's just been completely buried.
It,
Um,
it, yeah, for sure. And that's, of course, by design. The
yeah.
companies, Monsanto, Bayer, and the other companies spend a lot of time and money not just producing research that supports their position, but funding academics, university programs, nutritionists, a whole array of organizations, groups, and individuals that they put their dollar stamp on to get them to support their policy positions.
Mm. Yeah, I'm quite nervous about bringing this one out in particular because a lot of people who are confronted by the idea will turn a blind eye or just simply, I'll be viewed as a conspiracy theorist. But I'm quite nervous about that, to be honest. It's a weird feeling, even though, I've seen enough of it now to be like, okay, there's absolutely no denying. But what about you in
There's
your,
there's absolutely no denying. I was asked to speak to the European Parliament in 2017. Yes, um, with a group of other people that they called experts. I don't know that I would call myself an expert, but there were, I think, seven of us, and scientists, and I'm not a scientist, and I don't weigh in on does this actually cause cancer or does it not actually cause cancer. Like I guess I feel like that is a question better answered by someone who has more schooling than I do. Um, What is absolutely not deniable is absolutely true is that Monsanto spent millions of dollars and many years working to hide evidence that its chemical products caused cancer, working to hide it, working to manipulate the research, working to manipulate the regulators. We have email communications, we have text communications, we have internal reports, we have years and years and years and years of documents that show very clearly intentional deception, intentional efforts to hide information about a product causing cancer. So if it doesn't cause cancer, why would they need to do that? Why in God's name would they ever need to do that?
Exactly.
One of the
Yeah.
judges in the case, one of the judges in the litigation, and I haven't, I'm paraphrasing here, but he made a comment in court to the Monsanto attorneys. If you had if your company had spent the millions of dollars that affect cancer, if you'd spent that money instead on trying to determine if you could make your product safer or if it actually was safe, you may not even be in this position, right? Um,
Yes.
but that wasn't the route that the company took.
But, and then
So
I
it's
wonder
not a
who,
conspiracy theory.
no. And who's sending those text messages? Are they up on the stand in these court cases? Like who are these people?
Well, there was one relationship in particular. I mean, there's a lot of different stories, right? There a lot of different people, but in the US, and again, I don't know about in, other countries, but definitely in the US, which is where I was able to investigate and get records. Um, there were smallish team, four, five, six, maybe kind of key people within the EPA that Monsanto got very, very friendly with, and they text back and forth, and they talk about what we need in terms of, this report, and this is coming up. Jess Rowland was an official inside the EPA who was in charge of the Cancer Assessment Review Committee for glyphosate. Talked about being a friend and being useful to them in their defense of glyphosate.
Mm,
Um, they talked about, there's a famous email where they talk about Jess said if he can kill this, he should get a medal, referring to trying to kill a particular investigation, a probe, a review that a government agency wanted to do looking at the toxicity of glyphosate. Monsanto had reached out to the EPA top people saying, hey, we need you to make this go away. We don't want them looking at glyphosate. We don't want the ATSDR, which was this agency part of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the US. This was 2015, maybe later. I can't remember.
mm,
I mean, I think it was 2015. They wanted to do a toxicity review of glyphosate, and Monsanto did not want that to happen and reached out to these top officials at the EPA to ask them to please make it go away. And then you can see in the communications, the EPA officials, these are the top people, like jumping to Monsanto's beck and call to make this go away. And they were
wow.
successful initially in making it go away. So you see
Okay.
those types of communications, just as our friend, he can be useful to us in the defense of glyphosate. Things were changed, or documents were changed, and then they were leaked out, for right before a key Monsanto hearing, and then they were pulled back from the EPA. I mean, there were all sorts of shenanigans that went on.
Wow. I need to make a movie about this.
I know. I hope that that's what they're doing.
You might be the lead role, Carrie. And what
I
about
mean,
when,
it's, yeah, jaw-dropping stuff.
yeah, what about when Bayer purchased Monsanto? How did, because that's just after the release of your book. How did that change? Did you see that coming and how did that change things? Because I was Googling the other day, like, does Bayer own the chemotherapy that I took? Yeah. And then I was going to have I would have had a heart attack if they do, but I'm sure it's some other corrupt company. But yeah, can you explain what happened then and now how they've got that perfect little closed loop system?
Yeah, a lot of people have talked about that. Yeah, in one of the U.S. Supreme Court appeals that Monsanto made early on in this litigation, as they're losing, they have made different appeals to different courts, of course, and they've run up to the Supreme Court a few times now. Um, but in one of the appeals that were filed, I don't remember the year now, but I do remember they had a number of amicus briefs, coming in on their behalf. And some of them were from companies that own cancer treatments, that provide cancer treatments. And these companies are supporting Monsanto, of course, and saying, don't regulate, don't shut down this product, right? You support
Mhm.
Monsanto, support Roundup, support glyphosate. And these are companies that aren't in agriculture, that don't use glyphosate. These are companies that make money selling cancer treatments. So, certainly that kind of closed loop that you're talking about has been noted um, by many different journalists and other people. It just seems horrendous um, to think that a company would intentionally want to cause disease so that they can make money, treating disease. But that's certainly something that's out there and that's talked about. You got, I don't remember your other question.
Oh,
Sorry.
that's so good. Yeah, it is. It is really hard to believe, but now I don't know. Just since what I've been researching, then I don't shut anything out now, which kind of sucks, really. I do miss
Oh,
that
you asked
innocent.
how it changed after Bear.
Yeah, for you. Yeah.
I think there has been, at least in my limited, view of the world here, um, they did buy the company in 2018. I am astonished that they did not, that they were astonished that the litigation hit so hard. Um, because
Mm.
if they had just read my book, or if they had just followed, many of myself and other journalists, it took a while for other journalists to kind of get on the beat and start really kind of seeing. And I remember some of them, really even questioning me early on and then coming around going, oh my God, you're right. Like, look at this evidence. But um, it was clear, I think, from 2015, 2016, 2017, all of these years where they were in this preliminary acquisition mode, this train that was headed their way that was just going to steamroll. And Monsanto executives were brilliant. They knew what was coming. They knew the gig
Mm.
was up, you know, and they got out and they got their millions and they walked away. Many of them, some of them stayed on with Bear, but um, you know, Bear was stunned. As I said, the shareholders were stunned. They were caught very off guard by the weight of the evidence against Monsanto and Roundup and glyphosate and how that spiraled into all of these nightmarish publicity, nightmare for PR with all these jury verdicts and all the evidence that was spotlighted. Um, they have, I think, taken a higher road than Monsanto. They have stopped funding some of the front groups. There's been less kind of harassment and dirty tricks seemingly being played since Bear took over. Is my view, which may or
Okay,
may
well,
not be correct.
that's good to hear at least. Um, so what's next for you? Like, where are you? What are you working on now? And are you still involved in this side of it, Bayer Monsanto side of
Sure.
things?
Sure. I mean, I still cover agriculture, the environment. Paraquat is another weed killer that farmers use quite a bit. Um, Around the world, it's banned in many, many countries because it is so incredibly acutely toxic and because it has been shown to have um, very harmful long-term, effects from chronic use. It's not it's not used to the degree that glyphosate is, but is still very widely used, and it's been linked in particular to Parkinson's disease, um, which is prevalent in many farmer communities and farm families. So I'm writing a lot about that. A lot of very damning evidence that Syngenta knew about these effects from like the 70s and 80s. Um, some
Mm.
documents may be more egregious than Monsanto in terms of the efforts to deceive regulators and customers. I mean, it's just really a tragic case. Um, but I'm running a news outlet called The New Lead now, LEDE, thenewlead.org, if people want to check it out. And we're covering a lot of
Cool.
these issues and others, in terms of environment and human health, and just trying to, shine a light on issues that don't get a lot of light sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing what you're doing. So, and what's the solution? What do you think we should do? Like, it's such a tough one, but
To stop poisoning ourselves.
yes.
I I don't know. I just think, and as a journalist, I'm oriented to think as a journalist. I always feel like information is power, information, education, awareness, engagement. It's how you create change. It's people like you, doing podcasts, speaking out, telling other people. You don't, change doesn't occur unless you become aware and you
Yeah.
engage and you share. And that's what you're doing, and that's what I'm doing, and we all kind of do it in our own ways, I think, right? So
Yeah, for sure.
just keep
It's
doing
yeah, we
it.
need we need critical mass really, because otherwise I think we're going to have to reach a collective level of suffering and be forced to change. So, if the people are out there using it, then if they don't stop, their children are going to have to stop. Otherwise, we're going to be stopped by, I was stopped by bowel cancer, you know, and the people, whoever they are, they're going to get stopped by their child getting cancer or
Right.
them getting Parkinson's or something along those lines. It's going to be suffering unless we take action. So,
And
but
you're seeing
thanks.
that, right? Rising childhood cancers. We're seeing farm communities in particular. We're writing about that too in the new lead, these different farm states that Iowa in particular, where cancer rates are skyrocketing, and the researchers are warning about, pesticides and nitrates, farm chemicals, and the ag industry is fighting it. It's a battle, but it's
Mm,
one people are trying to wage, I think.
yeah. And like any
Excuse
problem,
me.
like any problem, if you're an alcoholic, you need to admit the fact that you're an alcoholic before you can start to stop drinking. So first and foremost, we need
Exactly.
we need to admit we've got a problem and we need to work on it together. But yeah, it's so important
I
what you're
need
doing.
something to drink. Why am I losing my voice? Mm. Sorry.
Thanks so much. It's incredible to see this side of it and scary and full on. And you take risks, and I really admire you for that. What you've done is just a bit of a gift to humanity, I think, and it's going to get out there even more. Hopefully, we can put it out there and get you out there in the story, and people can see this ugly side of it, but necessary to see it.
Right. Well, that's really kind of you. And I have tried to put stuff together. I've got a website, carrygillam.com, where you can read a lot of the articles or the two books, you can kind of see behind me. But just, yeah, trying to put the information out there so people can hopefully take steps to protect themselves, protect others, share with others. That's how you do it. So thank you for
Yeah.
having me. Thanks for spreading the word.
Oh, my pleasure. There's movement going on here in Australia. I can feel it, and your information is just a big part of it. So thanks so much.
It's a beautiful country. They had me there to talk about the book back in 2018, I think it was. Wonderful country, wonderful people. So
We'll try and get you
thank you.
back here soon.
Yeah, I'd like
We'll
that.
come and do a talk in our winery.
Oh my gosh, yes, that would be great. That'd be great.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Carrie.
All righty. Well, thank you.